In the heart of a bustling city square, where the chatter of passers-by mingled with the distant hum of traffic and the occasional laughter of children playing nearby, Alexander Grant adjusted his sunglasses as he strolled past the ornate fountain. The afternoon sun cast long shadows on the cobblestones, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh coffee from a nearby cafe. Alexander's mind was momentarily distracted by the gentle warmth, a rare moment of calm in his usually hectic schedule. As he paused to watch a street musician weave melodies on his violin, a sudden hesitant voice interrupted his reverie. "You're the one I need," the young woman said, her tone urgent yet fragile. Alexander turned sharply to find her standing just a few steps away, her eyes wide with a mixture of desperation and hope. Clara, as she would soon introduce herself, was no more than 25. Her dark hair tousled as if she'd rushed through the crowd. Her attire, though neat, showed subtle signs of distress, a wrinkled blouse, a skirt slightly askew. She looked around nervously, her gaze flickering to a group of men not far behind her. Their faces were set in hard lines, their eyes scanning the square with a predator's intensity. Alexander's instincts prickled. This was no ordinary encounter. "You don't know me," Clara continued, her voice trembling. "But I don't have anyone else. They're after me. I need your help." Her words hung in the air, heavy with fear. Alexander studied her carefully. The men trailing her hadn't yet noticed their exchange, but the tension was palpable. His mind raced. Here in this crowded square, beneath the indifferent gaze of strangers, a woman was silently pleading for sanctuary. He felt a surge of protectiveness rising within him, a rare impulse that bypassed his usual caution. "What's going on?" he asked, lowering his sunglasses to meet her gaze directly. Clara swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she clutched a small, worn handbag to her chest. "I was framed. A business scandal, something I had no part in. But they don't believe me. They want to ruin me to make sure I disappear. I heard about you, your influence, your resources. You're my only hope." Her voice broke on the last word, and she glanced again toward the men, who were now moving closer. Alexander's eyes followed her glance. The men's approach was deliberate, their pace quickening as if sensing the urgency of the moment. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, began to step away from the group, eyes locked on Clara. Without hesitation, Alexander stepped forward, positioning himself subtly between Clara and the approaching threat. His voice was calm but firm. "Excuse me, gentlemen. Is there a problem here?" The man with the scar paused, sizing up Alexander. For a tense moment, the square seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a dismissive sneer, the man muttered something inaudible and gestured to his companions. They hesitated, then melted back into the crowd, their gazes still lingering but no longer aggressive. Clara exhaled sharply, relief flooding her features. She looked up at Alexander with a gratitude that was almost tangible. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice still shaky. Alexander nodded, his mind already working through the implications of what she'd said. A business scandal framed and pursued by dangerous men. This was more than a mere coincidence. Clara's story was a plea for protection, and he knew the stakes were high. "Come with me," he said decisively, taking her arm gently to guide her away from the square. They moved quickly through the labyrinth of streets, blending into the ebb and flow of the city's pulse. As they turned a corner into a quieter alley, Clara's pace slowed, and she finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. "I don't have much time," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "They won't stop until they get what they want. I don't even know who to trust anymore." Alexander listened intently, his protective instincts sharpening. There was something about Clara's vulnerability that stirred a resolve within him. Not just to help, but to shield her from whatever darkness loomed. "Start from the beginning," he urged. "Tell me everything." Clara's voice softened, the initial tremor fading as she began to unravel the tale. She spoke of a high-stakes corporate world, where alliances shifted like sand and betrayal was a currency. She had been an analyst at a prominent firm, caught in a web of deceit spun by rivals eager to scapegoat her for a financial scandal. The evidence against her was fabricated, yet convincing enough to threaten her freedom and reputation. "They planted documents, emails, everything," she explained, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I tried to fight it, but no one believed me. And then the threats started. At first subtle. Phone calls, messages. But now it's worse. They follow me everywhere. Alexander absorbed every word, his mind piecing together the complexity of the situation. The men in the square were likely agents of those powerful enough to manipulate the system against her. This was a calculated attempt to isolate and intimidate. "Have you contacted the police?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "I'm scared they're involved, or that the evidence will be dismissed. I don't have anyone to turn to." Alexander's gaze hardened with determination. He wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was a man who understood the weight of influence and the power it could wield for good. If Clara was right, she was trapped in a dangerous game, and he was the only ally she had. "We'll find a way," he promised. "But you need to stay close. I'll make sure you're safe." A subtle shift occurred in Clara's demeanor, a flicker of hope amid the fear. She nodded, clutching his arm as if anchoring herself to a lifeline. As they slipped back toward a less crowded street, Alexander took a moment to scan their surroundings. The city moved on obliviously, unaware of the quiet drama unfolding in its midst. But for Clara, this moment marked the first step toward sanctuary. The tall man with the scar reappeared briefly at the edge of the square, his eyes scanning the crowd. His gaze locked onto the spot where Clara and Alexander had vanished. Frustration flickered across his face before he turned and disappeared into the throng. Alexander quickened his pace, his mind already calculating the next moves. This was no longer a random encounter. It was the beginning of a battle for truth and safety. And Alexander Grant was ready to stand as Clara's shield amid the storm. Inside the dimly lit lounge of an upscale hotel perched above the city's skyline, the atmosphere was a sharp contrast to the chaotic square they had just left behind. Soft jazz hummed quietly from hidden speakers, and the muted clinking of glassware mingled with hushed conversations. Alexander settled into a plush leather chair, motioning for Clara to do the same across from him. The city lights flickered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a gentle glow over the room. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around a glass of water Alexander had ordered, her eyes darting toward the entrance every few moments. The tension in her shoulders was palpable, though the safety of the lounge offered a fragile sense of reprieve. Alexander studied her carefully. The woman sitting before him was more than a frightened stranger. She was someone caught in a perilous trap, her future teetering on the edge of ruin. He sensed the weight she carried, not just the immediate threat, but the deeper fear of a life unraveling. "Start from the beginning," Alexander urged gently, his voice low but steady. "Tell me everything that happened." Clara took a slow breath and began, her voice tentative at first but growing steadier as she recounted the story. "I was an analyst at a major investment firm," she explained, "working on a project that was supposed to be a breakthrough. But someone wanted to take me down. They planted false evidence, fabricated emails and documents that implicated me in embezzlement and insider trading. It was a conspiracy to ruin my reputation and career." Alexander nodded, absorbing the details. "Do you have any idea who would do this?" "Someone within the firm." She hesitated, then nodded. "There's a group of executives, people who felt threatened by my work, who wanted to cover up their own misdeeds. I tried to report it, but the higher-ups ignored me or turned a blind eye. When the scandal broke, I was the scapegoat." Her eyes darkened as she recounted the fallout. "I lost my job overnight. But worse, I started receiving threats. Phone calls at odd hours, shadowy figures following me. I knew I had to get away before things got worse." Alexander listened without interruption, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. The men who had pursued her in the square were likely hired to intimidate or worse, ensuring silence through fear. "This isn't just about a business scandal," Alexander said softly. "It's about power and control. They don't want you to fight back." Clara looked up, meeting his gaze with a flicker of hope. "That's why I came to you. I don't know anyone else who can help." Alexander's mind raced, considering the resources at his disposal. He was used to navigating high-stakes situations, but this was personal now. Protecting Clara meant more than just providing shelter. It required strategy, legal support, and careful investigation. "I want to help you clear your name," he said firmly. "But first, we need to get a full picture of what we're dealing with." I'll bring in my legal team and security experts. We'll start gathering evidence. Anything that can expose the truth and keep you safe." Clara's shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension easing as she absorbed his words. "I don't know how to thank you." Alexander smiled faintly. "No thanks needed. Just trust me." He reached for his phone and quickly dialed a number, his voice crisp and commanding. Within minutes, two individuals entered the lounge. A composed woman with sharp eyes and a man with a calm, reassuring presence. Alexander introduced them to Clara. "This is Rachel, my lead legal counsel," he said. "And this is Marcus, head of security. They'll coordinate the efforts to protect you and investigate the scandal." Rachel extended a hand to Clara, her demeanor professional but kind. "We'll need any documents you have, any communications that might be relevant. Everything will be confidential." Marcus nodded, adding, "We'll also assess your current security risks and implement protective measures. You're not alone in this." Clara felt a surge of relief. For the first time in weeks, she sensed a lifeline extending beyond her own desperation. As Rachel and Marcus began outlining their plans, Alexander sat back, watching Clara with a protective gaze. He could see the fragile hope beginning to bloom within her. A stark contrast to the fear that had consumed her moments before. Over the next hour, Clara shared what little evidence she had managed to save. Emails, meeting notes, and a few suspicious financial transactions she had flagged before the scandal erupted. Rachel took meticulous notes, her mind already forming a strategy to untangle the web of deceit. Marcus spoke quietly with Clara about practical steps to enhance her safety. Changing routines, securing her living space, and staying vigilant about potential surveillance. Alexander felt the weight of responsibility settle firmly on his shoulders. He had plunged into this unexpected role. Protector, ally, investigator, with a clarity of purpose he hadn't anticipated. As the evening deepened, the lounge grew quieter, the city's lights twinkling like distant stars. Clara looked out the window, her expression contemplative but less haunted. "Do you think I can really fight this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander met her eyes, steady and unwavering. "Idol. And I'll be with you every step of the way." A fragile trust had formed between them, one born not just of circumstance, but of a shared determination to confront the darkness that threatened to engulf her. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the quiet alliance forged high above its streets. But inside the lounge, amidst the soft glow and whispered plans, a battle had begun, and Clara was no longer alone. The evening air was thick with anticipation as Alexander Grant's private event unfolded in the elegant ballroom of his penthouse. Crystal chandeliers cast sparkling light over the gathered guests, business leaders, influencers, and a few carefully selected allies. The hum of polite conversation and clinking glasses filled the room, but beneath the surface, Alexander's mind was focused entirely on the task at hand. Clara stood close to him, her posture tense but determined. The transformation from the frightened woman in the city square to this poised figure was striking. She had spent days working with Alexander's team, piecing together the tangled threads of the conspiracy that had ensnared her. Tonight was the moment to confront the threat head-on. Alexander's security team moved discreetly through the crowd, alert and ready. Rachel, his lead legal counsel, had ensured that law enforcement was quietly on standby, prepared to intervene at the first sign of trouble. The evidence collected, documents, emails, witness statements, had been carefully reviewed and was ready to be presented. As the night deepened, Alexander stepped forward, raising his glass to capture the room's attention. "Thank you all for joining me this evening," he began, his voice steady and commanding. "Tonight, we are not just celebrating success. We are standing for truth and justice." He gestured toward Clara, who stepped into the spotlight, her gaze sweeping the room. "This is Clara," Alexander continued. "She has been the victim of a calculated attempt to destroy her reputation and livelihood. But thanks to careful investigation and the courage to stand up, we have uncovered the real culprits behind this scandal." A hush fell over the guests as Rachel approached, distributing copies of the evidence to key individuals. Investigators, journalists, and legal authorities present under the guise of social attendees. The documents detailed the fabricated emails, falsified financial records, and the orchestrated campaign to frame Clara. Suddenly, a murmur rippled through the crowd as two men from the earlier group, the same ones who had shadowed Clara in the square, were quietly escorted out by security. Their presence here, uninvited and exposed, underscored the seriousness of the situation. One of the men attempted to protest, but Marcus, the head of security, intercepted him with a calm but firm warning. The police, now visibly present, stepped in to take statements and secure the scene. Clara's eyes met Alexander's, gratitude shining through her composure. The weight she had carried for so long seemed to lift, replaced by a burgeoning sense of empowerment. Rachel addressed the assembled guests, her tone professional yet resolute. This case is far from over, but tonight marks a turning point. With this evidence, we will pursue legal action to hold those responsible accountable. Alexander nodded. And we will ensure Clara's name is cleared. No one should be subjected to such injustice. The atmosphere shifted as the threat that had loomed so heavily began to dissipate. The presence of law enforcement and the exposure of the conspirators sent a clear message. Intimidation and deceit would not prevail. As the evening wore on, Clara found herself surrounded by supportive faces, friends old and new, who offered words of encouragement and solidarity. The transformation in her demeanor was evident. The fear that had once clouded her eyes was replaced by determination and hope. Alexander remained at her side throughout, a steady presence amid the unfolding drama. He recognized the strength she had summoned and felt a growing respect for her resilience. When the last guest departed and the ballroom emptied, Alexander and Clara stood together, the city skyline stretching out before them through the expansive windows. Tonight proved something important, Alexander said quietly. That standing together against injustice makes all the difference. Clara smiled, a genuine warmth lighting her features. I couldn't have done this without you. He shook his head. You did the hard part. You faced the fear and refused to back down. As they looked out over the city, the threat that had once cast a shadow over Clara's life now seemed distant, a challenge overcome through courage and unity. Their journey was far from finished, but this victory marked a critical step toward reclaiming control and forging a future free from fear. In the weeks that followed the confrontation at Alexander's penthouse, Clara's life began to shift in ways she had scarcely imagined possible. The fear that had once tethered her every step loosened its grip, replaced by a cautious but growing confidence. The city, once a cold and threatening maze, now seemed to hold promise and possibility. Alexander remained a constant presence in her life, not as a distant protector, but as a steadfast ally and friend. Their relationship, born from necessity and urgency, evolved into something deeper, rooted in trust, respect, and a genuine care that neither had anticipated. One crisp morning, Clara stood by the window of her modest apartment, sunlight filtering through sheer curtains and casting a warm glow across the room. She sipped her coffee, watching as the streets below stirred to life. The memory of those early days, the panic, the uncertainty, the relentless pursuit by shadowy figures, felt like a distant nightmare. Now, she was preparing for an important meeting, a chance to rebuild her career on her own terms. Alexander arrived shortly after, carrying a stack of documents and a reassuring smile. Ready for today? He asked, placing the papers on the kitchen table. Clara nodded, her eyes bright with determination. More than ever. Thanks to you and your team, I have a chance to start over. To prove who I really am. He studied her for a moment, admiration evident in his gaze. You've earned this. No one can take that away from you. Together, they reviewed the plans for Clara's re-entry into the professional world. A carefully crafted strategy designed to showcase her expertise and integrity. Alexander's network opened doors that had previously been closed, connecting her with mentors, potential employers, and advocates who believed in her. As days turned into weeks, Clara found herself stepping back into the arena with renewed strength. She attended meetings, delivered presentations, and engaged with colleagues who treated her with the respect she deserved. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined her. Outside of work, Alexander and Clara shared moments of quiet companionship. They explored the city together, their conversations ranging from light-hearted banter to deeper reflections on trust and resilience. In these moments, the boundaries between protector and protected blurred, replaced by a genuine partnership. One afternoon, they strolled through a bustling park, the air filled with the laughter of children and the scent of blooming flowers. Clara paused to watch a group of teenagers practicing a dance routine, their energy infectious. "I never thought I'd feel this free again," she confessed, turning to Alexander. "For so long I was trapped by fear and doubt." He smiled softly. "You found your way out. You're stronger than you realize." Their bond had grown beyond the initial crisis. It was a connection forged through shared struggle and triumph. Clara no longer trembled at every unexpected sound or glance. Instead, she moved through the world with a quiet confidence that inspired those around her. Back at her apartment, Clara placed a framed photograph on the mantel, a picture from the night of the event at Alexander's penthouse. It captured a moment of victory, of truth unveiled and courage embraced. Alexander noticed it the next time he visited and nodded approvingly. "A reminder of how far you've come." Clara smiled. "And of the people who stood by me." Their journey had transformed both their lives. Alexander found fulfillment beyond business deals and public acclaim, discovering the profound impact of genuine connection and support. Clara reclaimed her narrative, no longer a victim but a survivor and advocate for truth. The city square where their story had begun remained a place of possibility, a symbol of resilience, trust, and the power of standing together against adversity. In that space, their partnership flourished, marked not just by necessity, but by a bond that promised new beginnings and enduring strength. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.